You've probably heard this one and thought, yeah, obviously bees sting you and then they die. And sad story, moving on. But here's the part nobody actually stops to think about. The bee just used its only weapon to defend its home and it killed itself doing it. That's not a heroic sacrifice. That sounds like a catastrophic design flaw. Why would millions of years of evolution keep a weapon that destroys the user the moment it's fired? And does every bee actually die this way? Or is that just something people say? What's really happening inside your skin after that stinger stays behind? Is it still doing something after the bee is already dying on the ground? And why don't wasps seem to have this problem at all? Yeah, they sting you, fly off, sting someone else, and nobody talks about wasps sacrificing themselves. So what's actually different? The answers are weirder, smarter, and more unsettling than you think. And by the end of this, you're going to look at a honey jar on your kitchen counter very differently than you did 30 seconds ago. Picture this. You're at a backyard barbecue, someone gets a little too close to a nest tucked under the eaves, there's a sudden sting, and everyone crowds around to look. Tiny stinger still lodged in the skin, maybe even visibly pulsing. The bee stumbles away in the grass and within minutes it's dead. The universal reaction is some version of, well, that was pointless. The bee attacked, lost its only weapon, and died for it. What did it even accomplish? That reaction is almost completely wrong, and the reason it feels right is that we've been watching a cartoon version of this moment our whole lives. The sting happens fast, the bee dies, story over. Except the story isn't over. That stinger is still working, the bee is gone, and the job is still running. Here's the first thing most people get wrong. Not all bees die when they sting. Yeah, that's a honeybee specific situation. And even then, it only happens under a very specific condition, thick mammal skin. That part really matters. Yeah, when a honeybee stings another insect or even another bee during a hive conflict, the stinger goes in and comes right back out, clean, no death. The bee flies away completely fine. The dying only happens when it stings something like you, or a dog, or a bear. So this isn't a tragic universal bee design flaw. It's a targeted response to a very specific kind of threat, which makes the real question much sharper. Why does mammal skin cause this, and why doesn't insect skin? The answer is the stinger itself. Look at it under a microscope and it's not a needle, it's a fishhook. The honeybee's stinger has backward-facing barbs along the shaft, tiny and angled like the teeth on a fishing hook. When it punctures thin insect exoskeleton, the barbs barely engage. In and out, no problem, clean withdrawal. But mammal skin is a completely different material. It's thick, layered, and elastic. The moment those barbs sink in, the skin closes around them like a grip and locks. When the bee instinctively tries to pull away, it can't just slide back out. The barbs are set. Instead, the entire venom apparatus, like the stinger shaft, the muscles wrapped around it, and the venom sac itself. Tears free from the bee's abdomen. That's the fatal part for the bee. Its internal anatomy gets pulled out with the stinger. But here's the part that should genuinely change how you think about this moment. That detached venom sac doesn't stop when the bee dies. It keeps pumping on its own, contracting rhythmically, driving venom deeper into the skin for up to a minute after the bee is already on the ground, dying. The bee didn't just sting you. It left behind a self-operating venom delivery machine still running without a pilot, with no bee required to keep it going. Now compare that to a wasp. Wasp stinger is smooth. No barbs, no hooks, clean geometry. It goes in, it comes out, and the wasp flies away to sting again whenever it wants. That's why the same wasp can ruin your entire picnic repeatedly without consequence. Same story with bumblebees, which have stingers much closer to that smooth design and can technically sting more than once, though they're generally quite reluctant to do it at all. So the obvious question becomes, why did honeybees evolve the barbed version at all if the cost is always the same? The bee dies. What does the barb design give the colony that the smooth version doesn't? And this is where the real story starts. Go back maybe tens of millions of years. A honeybee colony isn't just a cluster of insects doing their thing. It's a single living organism, 50,000 individuals functioning as one coordinated system, maintaining a complex temperature-regulated structure and protecting an irreplaceable cache of dense, high-calorie honey that took the whole colony an entire season to produce. One bear. One determined raid. That's genuinely all it takes to destroy everything the colony has built. Now imagine two possible evolutionary paths. In the first, the bee stings the threat once and flies away. The bear feels a quick pinch, swipes casually, keeps eating, and the colony loses its entire winter food supply. In the second, the bee stings, tears itself apart in the process, but leaves a barbed stinger buried deep in the bear's snout, still pumping venom, escalating the pain for a full uninterrupted minute. As it dies, the bee also releases a chemical alarm signal, a pheromone that smells like bananas to other bees, marking the exact location of the threat and calling in more defenders. That bear doesn't get a quick pinch, it gets a slow, worsening, like impossible to ignore lesson delivered by a weapon that outlived the bee that fired it. One dead bee equals one bear that remembers this location isn't worth it. Possibly for years, the individual is completely expendable. The colony of 50,000 and every jar of honey they've stored is not. The bee didn't fail its mission. It completed it perfectly. You have been watching this system your entire life without fully registering it. Like that kid in school who got stung on the playground and immediately made everyone come look at the tiny thing still pulsing in the skin. That was the detached venom sac still contracting on autopilot. Every nature documentary you've half-watched showing a bear swatting furiously at its own face while raiding a hive, rolling in the dirt, retreating, that frantic behavior is exactly the outcome this defense was built to produce. Like every cartoon bee sting that shows one clean jab and then the bee flies away fine. Completely wrong anatomy, wrong species, wrong result. The honey jar sitting on your kitchen shelf right now exists because this exact defense system was effective enough to protect the colony long enough across enough seasons to store what's inside it. The first aid advice you've probably heard at some point: don't pinch the stinger, or scrape it out sideways with a fingernail or a card. That advice exists because pinching the venom sac compresses it and injects the remaining venom faster, making it worse. The sac is still loaded. Even the phrase "sting like a bee" carries a different weight now. It doesn't just mean sharp or sudden, it means persistent, escalating, still going after the source has already left the building. There's a real trade-off here worth naming, though. This system is genuinely expensive to run. Every bee that uses it dies, and the colony can't absorb unlimited losses without consequences. That's a big part of why honeybees don't sting casually or impulsively. A honeybee choosing to sting you is a last resort, not a reflex. Fast movement near a hive swatting at bees, heavy vibrations, strong unfamiliar smells, these trigger the defense response because they pattern match closely to large animal threats the colony has faced for millions of years. Calm, slow, a non-threatening movement near bees almost never ends in a sting. The bee wasn't being aggressive. It crossed a threshold where the cost of losing one worker was clearly worth paying to protect the whole. That's not recklessness. That's a calculated trade made by an organism that doesn't think in terms of individual survival. So here's the reset. You thought it was a pointless death. A small creature fumbling its one weapon and paying for it with its life over a minor disturbance. I get what it actually was, a precision self-sacrifice delivery system that keeps dealing damage after the soldier is already gone, simultaneously signals reinforcements with a chemical alarm, and teaches the attacker a painful, memorable lesson that can last years. The so-called design flaw is one of the most effective